Have you ever thought that the modern world is ugly? Compared to the art or buildings of the Middle Ages, our loud advertisements, plastic packaging and concrete landscapes can seem tacky and soulless. But what if I told you that human beings faced this same problem of ugliness 5,500 years ago? From around 6,000 to 5,000 BC, the people of Mesopotamia, now Iraq, were making beautiful pottery like this. In fact, according to some scholars, they were making the finest pottery you could find anywhere in the Stone Age world. But fast forward to 3,500 BC, and we get this. What I want to find out is, why? Why did something so beautiful become so ugly? And can these changes shed a light on the modern world or even human nature itself? Let's dig into the details. First up, we have the Halaf culture, spanning from around 6,100 BC to around 5,000 BC, based in northern Iraq. Halaf people lived in small villages in circular mud brick houses made from these cigar-shaped bricks. They were farmers, relying on rainfall to grow their crops like lentils, peas, and barley. Hunting remained important, with Halaf people stalking animals like wild asses, or birds, or hares through the hills and the scrub and the patches of forest which stretched over this part of Mesopotamia. But their pottery is arguably the greatest of all. At a site called Arpachia, the burned remains of a house preserved incredible multicolored vessels, like this and this. It's unclear what this house was. Was it the residence of some pottery-hoarding bigwig, or was it actually a pottery workshop itself? We don't actually know. But further south in Mesopotamia, you find the Samarran culture. This lasted from around 5,500 BC to 4,800 BC. Now, these lot also made some truly divine ceramics, like this, and this, and this. The Samarran period was a time when people were getting even more serious about agriculture. The Samarrans lived too far south to rely on rainfall for their crops. So, at key sites like Tel Es Sawan, there is evidence of canal digging, connecting the river with field systems in a form of simple irrigation. But still, Samarran society was pretty egalitarian. Archaeologists haven't really found much difference in house sizes, and all of their houses are sort of small, square-shaped buildings made of mud brick, sometimes with whitewashed walls on the inside. Now, it's really interesting that the most elaborately decorated types of pottery coming from the Halaf and Samarran cultures are these sort of large, wide bowls. They seem perfect for serving groups of people. Let's imagine for a moment what it would actually be like to eat from one of these bowls. The amazing patterns which decorate the pottery would initially be hidden under a pearly mass of grains, peas, and lentils with fish or meat mixed in. I like to picture people sitting around a fire in someone's home, the smoke billowing around the mud brick or reed walls, people's greasy fingers and eyes glittering in the red shadows of the hearth as they pass the bowl around. Then bit by bit, as the food is removed by hungry fingers, the image at the center of the bowl is slowly revealed. Gazelles, fish, the burgundy leaves of a flower. The art itself kind of symbolizes, or at least captures, the beauty of the connections people have fostered through the communal dining experience. Idyllic, right? But as we know, such pottery designs and ways of eating were not to last. You see, in the Halaf and Samarran periods, you start seeing the use of seals. A seal was just a patterned bit of stone or wood or bone that people would push into clay to leave a unique impression. So let's say I had a seal with the letter M on it for Matthew, my name, and then I'd get a bit of clay, I'd put it on a pot, let's say a pot of beer, and I'd push the M seal into the clay. It would leave an M impression showing that me, Matthew, owned that beer. Useful, right? But these early farmers and potters extraordinaire were unwittingly laying the foundations of this technology for the invention of complex bureaucracy. It was the development of such systems like this which had bitter ramifications for pottery. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now let's turn the clock forward to around 5,000 BC. We are in a new period altogether, which scholars term the Ubaid. In this period, we begin to see a steady decline in the quality of pots. But why? Firstly, let's understand how society as a whole was changing. Fucking hell, how many planes are there? The Ubaid is the period where the spectre of civilization begins to drag itself out of the dark soils of southern Mesopotamia like a giant, ghostly tadpole. At the center of these developments was a place called Eridu, home to some 4,000 people. This is the place Mesopotamians would forever afterwards credit with being the birthplace of their civilization. Built on a sand dune, the town overlooked a vast lagoon of salt marshes, vistas of reeds teeming with waterfowl and buzzing with insects, while boats brought in nets filled with fish and mussels. In Eridu, we see new hierarchies forming. This isn't so apparent when it comes to private wealth, as the mud brick and reed houses which Eridu was comprised of are all relatively uniform in size. But what we do see is a new sequence of buildings, quite architecturally distinct from the houses and built on these clay or stone bases. This is a temple, and the temple at Eridu was home to one of Mesopotamia's most fabulous gods, Enki. Enki was a trickster god, a god of fresh water, a god of progress. How fitting then that each temple was successively torn down with ever larger mud brick structures containing altars and staircases, replacing the last as we move closer to the 4th millennium BC. But also with the Ubaid culture, we get these strange new figurines of the type that gets ancient aliens enthusiasts salivating. Lizard-headed people, mostly women, stare through slanted eyes at the viewer, wearing tall conical headdresses or perhaps tall skulls. Cranial deformation when babies with their soft skulls have like bandages and planks put on their heads when they're developing so they get weird-shaped skulls. That was actually really widespread in Mesopotamia at the time. Indeed, the appearance of Ubaid people was pretty colourful. Obviously you have the elongated skulls, but they also like to wear elaborate piercings. That's a piercing you get here, as well as stretcher earrings. That's right, folks, punks and goths, they're 7,000 years old. But I want to draw your attention to one of these lizard statues unearthed from Eridu. This one is a man, which makes him quite unique, and he's holding a mace, a stone club, the most primitive but most enduring symbol of power. For later Mesopotamians, the mace was a symbol of kingly authority. Does this hint at the direction society was travelling? Was power getting accumulated in fewer and fewer hands? But what is really striking is the almost one-to-one relationship between the improvement of temple architecture and the degradation in pottery standards. Ubaid pottery as a whole is still quite good, but this is a period of over 1,000 years, and the pottery quality gets steadily worse as the time goes on. People began using machines like potter's wheels in order to help make this pottery, with late ceramics showing the striations typical of turning a pot on a wheel. There are less pottery forms, and it seems that craftsmen are using less and less invention in the way that pots are decorated. Indeed, increasingly it seems like pots are being used more and more for purely utilitarian reasons, and perhaps no longer for this kind of communal feasting we hypothesized earlier with clan or kinsmen. Can we detect in these changes the rise of a more impersonal institution? So let's briefly consider what happens next. Civilization. Uruk, the world's first city with a population of over 10,000 people, matures properly by around 3,500 BC. Their culture will spread all over Mesopotamia. Yet despite such grand achievements, over half of the pottery found at Uruk sites are these. Let me introduce you to beveled rim bowls, the plastic bag or polystyrene burger box of the 4th millennium BC. Why did they have them? Well, in truth, a lot about Uruk is still very mysterious. What we do know is that this was a far more centralized society, possibly governed by the temple. We know from temple records that the institution hoarded huge amounts of grain, of beer, of dates, and other resources. And architecture, particularly temple architecture, also takes a quantum leap forward. Temples get decorated in elaborate mosaics of colored cones. The city streets of Uruk are planned on a grid, and the main temple was even whitewashed with gypsum paint, inside and out, which must have been a blindingly awesome experience to see. In the Uruk period, we also see for the first time unambiguous depiction of authority figures. These are the mysterious priest kings. We don't really know if that's exactly what they were, but they're noticeable for their rounded hats and their enormous beards. But these men are not mere civil leaders or temple bureaucrats. No, no, no. They project an ideology of domination. In an Uruk-inspired knife handle from Egypt, a priest king is shown throttling a pair of lions. But what about everyone else? Well, instead of labret-wearing lizard people, we see shaved, doughy, bald clones, sometimes naked, heaving big bowls of offerings and taking them to the temple precinct. Uruk art depicts the rote work of thousands of labourers, tending animals, sweating with tools in factories and workshops. So instead of farming and hunting to survive, citizens now get jobs with wages of unleavened bread, stuck in a grotesque beveled rim bowl. That's right, most scholars think beveled rim bowls were wage packets. You got paid in unleavened bread in this rubbish little bowl, you take home, chuck it in the oven, and then you know, you can eat some bread for dinner. Everything now feeds the temple, the whole society built around supporting this institution, the temple. It is the central node of the community, presided over by the black-bearded scions of the great goddess, Inanna. And I think we need to picture it. The fumes from copper smelters tasting acrid on the streets of the city. Plumes of industry floating high above the trudging populace, casting shadows over the ravenous white temple at its heart. So, why did Mesopotamians stop making good pottery? Because pottery was no longer for display, for connection and communication. It was for distribution. For some frustratingly mysterious reason, some new ideology, some key change in human cognition, people came together to serve the god, the priest, the king. And their reward? Slop in misshapen buckets. Beauty became the preserve of the goddess and her chosen folk. Simplicity, the domain of her servants. When people had control over their lives, they made art. When people were controlled by others, they were served crudeness. I've written this strongly because history's more fun when someone has an axe to grind. But was ancient Uruk really this industrial predator, this duller of human souls, this forge for manacling minds? It is impossible to know. But someone far more learned and persuasive than myself could put to you a very different case. Uruk dissolved the old tribal bonds of village life, giving people some higher purpose. More than that, it gave people a new and exciting physical space, the world's first city. Perhaps Uruk didn't exist under a pall of smoke, but was instead a mud brick playground, ringing with the laughter of children, sharp with the scent of fish markets and drying clay. For crying out loud, without Uruk we wouldn't have monumental architecture, we wouldn't have affordable products created en masse, we wouldn't even have writing. When you see it this way, feeling anything other than awestruck and grateful seems churlish. Yet, that one fact remains, niggling like a worm in the brain. When it comes to pottery, something beautiful was made hideously ugly. Perhaps this is the nature of change. Perhaps everything comes at a cost. But one thing is certain. Things never stay the same. I find it plausible that our future descendants will one day marvel at our ugliness. They will be sitting in some ruined skyscraper somewhere, eating out of beautiful handcrafted dishes and looking with awe and horror at the glittering carcass of their history. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.